discussion now. So if I could ask the panelists to come up, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jeremy Depeau, who is a science and technology policy strategist, and I will let him take it from here. Oh, if you want to tweet, hashtag Shape Tomorrow.
Take the MC. We don't want to be in the middle.
Yeah, look at your talk. It's amazing. Hey? Dismissal my best. Maybe running. Nice to meet you.
I know.
Regan. I got it this time.
Hi everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, yeah, a little bit louder. I can talk loud. Listen, thanks you all for coming and participating today. We've got a great panel of tremendous expertise and experience, and it's a great opportunity to talk about a subject that's important for us today, and is including or evolving to be continually important as we move forward with this, the advances in this technology. In your packages, you have biographies. With the number of panelists that we have, we're going to skip intros and jump right into the discussion. And in order to make best use of time. Our objective today is really to look at what Canada needs to do to benefit from the shifting employment landscape as it relates to the utilization of new artificial intelligence techniques and the methods that are evolving as we speak. So there's the today and what we're experiencing, and there's tomorrow. So what I thought we should do to kick off is just frame the discussion a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to ask Regan to talk a little bit about what is meant by artificial intelligence. It's a term that was developed, I think, in the 1953. Then there was the 80s. We had Deep Blue. We had chess contests and all kinds of things, and now we're at a much deeper level of neural networks and role-based networks, and because it's such an umbrella term and so much hype around it, I wonder if you could kind of ground us a little bit in terms of what you see is meant by artificial intelligence in today's context.
So that's a big question. I'll start. I'm Regan Watts. I lead a group at IBM Canada responsible for innovation, but also corporate citizenship and government regulatory affairs. So I actually think about this issue wearing two hats, one on the innovation side, and that's work we do with universities and colleges to accelerate research, of which AI is a part of it, as well as work with startups, about 1,000 startups a year that we engage AI and other things. And then I wear the public policy hat from a GR perspective. So I'm going to be as quick and succinct as I can, knowing that there's 7 of us who have something to say tonight. So I'll talk about what most people hear, and you kind of referred to it in your question. AI for IBM is Watson, and that is our AI platform. It played chess, and it competed in Jeopardy, but it's other things too. Just today, Lexus released a new commercial that was written by Watson. A couple years ago at the Met Gala in New York, Watson designed a dress that one of the participants wore on the red carpet. So Watson actually in AI means lots of different things. But for us, the term AI, we think about it slightly differently in the context that we think of it as augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because we think AI has a role, but ultimately people, and Hillary talked about this in her remarks, we think people have to be at the core of the technology and using it. And we also use the term cognitive, which is learning. So that's an IBM term, but AI is more of an industry or popular culture vernacular. But for us, we think AI as an augmenter of work that people do that will learn, whether it's natural language processing, for example, or helping mining companies mine more efficiently, or designing commercials. AI is a tool that uses technology and algorithms and all that goes into making a hamster wheel to create output that, again, humans at the other end interact with, use, and deploy in their businesses or their marketplace.
Thank you very much. I have to note it's great to have such a diverse panel because I don't know if you're aware, but JFK used to do something where he'd bring a lot of people in a room that had very diverse perspectives. And he did that because he wanted to get everybody, he wanted to have a really roundabout insight. And he did that during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we all know that the outcome ended up to be very good at the end of the day. And it's symbolic to me in terms of why it's valuable to have diversity in opinions. And so first I was it was 7 of us, but then now I'm thinking this is really good. So yeah. So
He's kind of looking at me, to be honest.
So yeah. So yeah, over to you, Mandy. So
voted off.
Yeah, right. Oh, shit.
You're ripping stuff apart. You're putting it back together to make it beautiful again. Your rubber hits the road on what AI is. What does it mean to you?
Well, when you look at a diversified opinion, you brought it tonight, sitting in the middle of everybody here. So if you didn't read the document, I'm Mandy Renahan, and I'm known as the Blue Collar CEO. And so what I'm doing is bridging the gap between the white and the blue collars so that everybody understands the real importance of that and where it's been lost for many, 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 many centuries. And so, yes, I do rip things apart and I do put them back together, but here's the more important part. Today I spoke to 1 billion young people in the Durham region with a ball cap on, a t-shirt on, and that said blue collar intelligence on the back. And they all looked at me and I said, "You've never seen intelligence attached to blue collar, have you?" And they looked and they were like, "We've never really seen the name blue collar, to be quite honest." So the whole idea is that my company, Freshco, not the grocery store, but we don't have time for that, is that we are really a company that's defining technology in a field, in an area that truly has never seen anything but manual labor being its thing. And so we had one of our young women walk out today in an exoskeleton suit at 121 pounds, cute as a button, and she was fiery. The reality is that we worked with Lockheed Martin to develop this. They developed it, we just helped them figure out how it would work in construction. And so we brought it in and you know, you could see the young guys and the girls going, "Wow, this is awesome. I want to work for you." You know, and so at that moment, when you look at AI, the industry that I'm in is very behind in I guess in the fields that you guys are in. But when you look at AI and robotics, which this would be one, they go hand in hand. And our industry is like the brawn of AI. And the algorithm behind AI, if you talk about what was his name, Harold? Winston. Whatever.
Close enough.
The whole idea is that he's the brain behind the brawn in the industry that makes the robotics work. So from my perspective, I'm trying to make people see that at the end of the day, whether you are in the white collar industry or in the blue collar industry, we need to start talking a lot more to see a lot better things happen. Because there's a perception out there that's been deadly socially and to our economy. And I'm out there fixing that. And with a drink, it will even get better later. Just want to let you know that.
With the number of AI platforms out there, I bet you there is one named Harold.
Yeah. Or Winston.
Or Winston.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So Vivian, you're working in the legal field. We've talked a little bit about the impact of AI in your work. What's your perspective on what it means in terms of the work that you're doing?
It's funny that you ask that because I get that quite a bit at work. Lawyers are still trying to figure out what AI means in our practice, but in the most basic form, for us, from the legal perspective, artificial intelligence is the use of some system to mimic human behavior or human thought processing to generate a more efficient, generally cost-beneficial outcome. So that's how we think of it. And then once we really start talking, we'll see some of the examples that we're seeing in the legal profession, both in the court and outside of the court, and how we help our clients. My notes fell. Yeah, I guess not. Thanks. But yeah, we'll see how artificial intelligence is being used within the legal profession, but how we're also helping our clients use it with a legal mind frame.
Great, thank you. Tim, in the context of what is unique to Canada's social values and economy, how do you see our competitive situation from a global perspective today, and maybe in comparison to 3 to 5 years? And I asked that question in light of, I look at China. There's a great book by Kai-Fu Lee who talks about China's Sputnik moment. They've set standard or goals for 2020, 2025, and then by 2030, they see themselves as being the center of AI global innovation. And then we have the US that is trying to maintain its leadership. Where are we? What are some of the advantages? And how do we contextualize ourselves in where there are superpowers, large economies that are taking a lot of ownership over AI innovation? Canada needs to probably, and please challenge me if I'm wrong, but we probably need to niche ourselves based on what our strengths are, our economic strengths. How do you kind of see that? And there's a couple questions in one.
Yeah, that's actually quite a few pretty big questions. And I would
Welcome to the club.
Just start with the first one.
But I'll make a few observations. I mean, obviously, this is a truly global phenomenon. I mean, you've got not just AI, but the whole confluence of several different new technologies. You've got big data, you've got Internet of Things, you've got cloud computing, you've got various new elements of robotics and so on. And all these things are kind of hitting at the same time. And it's not even just the one technology, it's the way that the different technologies kind of get mixed and matched. And we're seeing across a whole range of different sectors of the economy that these are leading to big changes in how things are done. And I think the thing to keep in mind is it's not just a matter of like doing the same things more efficiently and more cheaply. It's a question of actually coming up with new products that didn't exist before and that we didn't even know we needed or that we wanted. And we see this pattern, and I think we've only just started to see the beginning of it. Now, of course, this is big subject of discussion internationally. I mean, this year Canada was in the presidency of the G7, and it was not AI specifically, but the future of work. Given all the technological changes, was one of the big topics for the G7 this year. It was also one of the big topics for Argentina's presidency of the G20, which includes the emerging market economies like China and India, as well as the advanced economies. And so, I mean, this is all a big, it's a big topic. I guess maybe starting point is a lot of the discussion, I think, is very simplistic. There's a sort of notion of, well, with AI, nobody will have a job in 20 years' time. Everything will be done by the machines. And I mean, ironically, actually, the reason that we need a lot of this stuff is because we're currently facing precisely the opposite problem. I mean, our populations are aging. We're short of a lot of critical skills, and we're short of skilled blue-collar like trades, but we're also short of a lot of the more technical skills. And so, we're seeing, in many of the advanced economies, growth rates are slowing down, and precisely because of this sort of aging of the population. And in Canada, we've seen the same sort of thing. We've seen the baby boomers sort of marching off into retirement, and a lot of their skills with them. And we've also seen that productivity growth hasn't kind of picked up to compensate. In fact, on the contrary, productivity has been growing more slowly than it was a couple of decades ago. And so really, the conclusion would be that we really need to have new technologies that will help make us all more productive. And when you think about AI in that context, economists have talked about it doesn't make everything, it doesn't automate everything. It replaces a particular set of skills, which are what University of Toronto professor Joshua Gantz talks about prediction machines. Basically that AI makes it much easier to predict stuff. And that's a part of so many different things that we do. And of course, what that means is that anything involving prediction gets cheaper, and people see their jobs replaced. But anything that complements prediction, which things involving judgment, that involve personal touches, that involve various things that require the human presence. I mean, those things all become more valuable. And so, in that context, we can think of where Canada is strong. We have. Of course, starting point, we have populations that are very educated, that have skills that require, many of the hard and soft skills that are needed to invent new stuff. But I think the important thing is also not just the invention part, but it's the adoption. Like how are these new technologies going to sort of complement the things we've already got? And I think that there are some, there's some strengths there as well. A lot of the Canadian workforce also has a lot of those soft skills, which are ones that are going to become increasingly valuable as these technologies continue to advance.
Thank you very much for handling my many questions in one.
That was amazing.
Fawad, you're in the center and working with this supercluster, the AI supercluster. With your experience with that, how would you look at that question in terms of how we're doing now, where we could go? What's the supercluster kind of centering its activities on?
Thank you. So just by way of background, I do executive search, and we're seeing the cross-section of talent and technology becoming more and more top of mind for boards and CEOs. I just want to build on one point that you just made around invention and adoption. Those are two different facets you can take when it comes to applying AI. And when it comes to invention, we did a lot of research around where does Canada have a seat at the table, and that's based on the institutions we have, the education system we have, the justice system we have. All these elements allow you to invent things. And if I were to take us back a few years, RIM was an invention, like we created that, right? But then the journey to commercialization is where we falter. That's where we need an opportunity to really be able to take it to the global scale. What happens in between is, no offense to Amazon, but big organizations from the US are able to take that talent and give them bigger opportunities elsewhere. And we lose that opportunity here in Canada. And so there's a lot of like-minded people who are saying, yes, we need Amazon and Googles of the world to be here. So they help us breed that talent. But at the end of the day, we need our own ecosystem, our own localized ecosystem that is funded by the government, partly, and then partly funded by the industry, So industry puts money where their mouth is, and that takes us to adoption. How does Canada not only invent these things but also adopt these elements? And that's where Scale AI and the reason that was mentioned was because our firm is doing the executive team for that supercluster. The intent of this supercluster is to give Canada that opportunity where industry is bringing in roughly about $700 million across Ontario and Quebec for the most part, and government is putting in $250 million. And this is supposed to be spent in joint projects. And the idea is you take initiatives that these organizations were going to run anyways, and you subsidize them. But the key is the projects need to be run by Canadian organizations. And eventually, over the next few years, these organizations, these localized companies keep on getting more and more funding through this construct, and they become commercialized globally. So we see an opportunity for Canada to continue on that spectrum. But it's when we sit in Toronto, it's easy for us to kind of feel like, oh, this is the hub of AI. The reality is we're quite small. We have an opportunity, but we're still quite small. And China and the US and Europe, although Europe is lacking because of their data issues, because they don't have access to that data the way China and the US is enabling. We have an opportunity, but we could lose it if we don't have the right infrastructure in place.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just ask everybody to speak into the microphone because we do have recording here and the audience. It's a big room, so appreciate that. Sunil, if you could pick up on that a little bit and your perspective on this discussion.
Sure.
And social values as
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll
as well.
pivot to the social side of this a little more. I mean, a big part of this conversation is future of work. A couple of people have mentioned already. I mean, I think we need to take a step back and think about the present day of work. I mean, we tend to get kind of insulated. The folks in this room, people on this panel, don't really see the struggles that many people in Canada are actually experiencing when it comes to the present day of work. I mean, if you look at the statistics in the past 20 years, in Ontario, if you're a non-management, non-professional worker, you've had zero wage growth adjusted for inflation over the past 20 years. Income inequality is at record highs across advanced economies, including Canada, the US, most of Western Europe. 6 million Canadians can't afford to visit their dentist due to cost pressures. Mental health issues cost the economy $30 to $50 billion a year. So it's wonderful to talk about AI. It's great that we've got the Vector Institute and all these other investments coming online. But we've already seen over the past 30 to 40 years that significant economic growth in Canada has not translated to opportunity for 30 to 40% of the population, I would conservatively estimate. So if we're thinking about these new economic opportunities going forward, the question shouldn't be, are they there or not? Obviously, we want to pursue them, but the question becomes a distribution issue. How do we make sure that the opportunities afforded by these new technologies are distributed fairly throughout society, and we're not just contributing to increased inequality, the top 1%, the top 10% continuing to get outsized gains of these economic opportunities. And I think I fear that's the situation we're in. We're basically kind of continuing our branch plant mentality in Canada of let's attract some multinationals to the country. We'll get some decent paying jobs, but we're not owning any of the IP, any of the intangibles that are being created here. They're all being rooted back to Silicon Valley, back to other countries. So I think we need to kind of take a hard look at where are we investing public funds? Is this something that's going to benefit Canadians in the long term? And I think a second kind of separate point there is there are huge questions around governance and ethics in the AI space, and Canada has an opportunity to lead there. I mean, I don't think the US and China are really paying much attention to those issues, to be honest. So if Canada wants to be a leader in AI anywhere, it's on ethics, it's on governance, it's how do we make systems that work fairly for everybody and don't just work for kind of the oligarchs and the elite in Silicon Valley. So I'd say that would be kind of one comparative advantage we potentially possess, rather than kind of saying we're investing 100 million here, 100 million here. I mean, MIT invested $1 billion last week in its AI research fund. I mean, that blows the entire public funding of Canada out of the water. That's one private institution in the country. So I think we're not going to outspend them. We're not going to out-talent them in terms of people. China and India are going to destroy us in terms of the amount of software engineers that they're going to produce in the next 10 to 20 years. So I think we need to kind of be thoughtful and try and help shape a future for the world that all of us want to live in.
Thanks, Sunil. Steve, you're right in the middle of it. You're deploying, in many fronts. You're seeing the opportunities for your business. How do you look at that question of economic advantage, socioeconomic advantage?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks to the organizers for having me here and everyone on the panel. So I'm with Amazon, and I mean, pardon me? I'm Brave. Sure. Canada's been a great place for us to do business and to grow. And people have raised valid questions already tonight, and I think those are the right questions to be asking. From my perspective, I don't think it's mutually exclusive to have investment from global companies and the need to build for Canada to build its own successful tech enterprises and IP and skills. Canada's a tremendously skilled has a tremendously skilled workforce, and that's what is attracting companies like Amazon. And we have a significant office here in Toronto, a significant and growing office in Vancouver as well. And the skills part and the graduates that are coming out of Waterloo, U of T, UBC, they're very highly skilled, highly sought after. I'm a Canadian. I'm very proud that we're able to offer these Silicon Valley jobs here in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Canada. And so when they graduate from University of Waterloo, that brain drain, now they have an option to stay at home or they have an option to come back home. But I mean, we're hiring a lot. Everybody's hiring a lot. There are not enough engineers, and that's not a surprise to anyone. The government's made some very smart moves in terms of immigration with the global skills strategy, bringing very talented people to Canada. But I think education is the key component that we need to look at, and we're really focused on that, both from a K-12 perspective and post-secondary. Was really proud this summer. We made a $500,000 donation to Canada Learning Code, formerly known as Ladies Learning Code, an amazing organization for them to focus on their K-12 programs and have additional code mobiles, which are these vans that they drive around the country, bringing IT and computer science education to students that may not be able to access that where they live. That's really important, because if we don't reach these students young, and I'm talking about kindergarten, they're going to grow older and think, well, this isn't for me, this coding stuff, I don't know it. And then by the time they need to choose their major, they're not even looking at it. And we do need to be encouraging more Canadians to get into computer science, and that as a real core part of our curriculum across the country. And Canada Learning Code's really leading the work on developing a K-12 framework nationally. But then just very quickly at the post-secondary level as well, one thing that we've seen is a huge marker for success for new engineers that we're hiring is having done co-op or integrated work learning. And that's something that we're really working on promoting more. I think if we can get, Waterloo has a fantastic program, and that's a large part of their success. And I think we need to look at how we can bring that to other schools, and that we can be increasing the overall number of successful graduates, because the skills that they come out of, if they've had that opportunity, really differentiate them when they're entering the workforce.
Thanks, Steve. Vivian, we've seen some examples with the deployment of AI early on, and there has been some biases, some that have contributed to sexual or racial discrimination. You've written about some of those cases. In terms of the people being involved in this process, based on your legal and policy experience so far, how is employment shifting with AI based on kind of the some of the experiences that we've had, and some companies are even putting in ethical principles. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit on that.
Sure. So I guess before I go into the examples, I think one important thing to keep in mind is when we're talking about the bias question, we're looking at the quality of the data involved. You refer to examples. We've had discussions about some examples in the media, including Amazon's hiring algorithm, and really all of those biases, whether it's gender bias, racial bias, it goes back to the quality of the data. And you need to think about, what is the end goal? What are we trying to achieve by using this algorithm? And the data that you will select will reflect whether or not you're able to achieve that end goal. That being said, if we're talking specifically within the legal context, we're still seeing people playing a role in the use of AI. So I'm a litigator. We use AI for e-discovery. So we're going through hundreds to thousands to hundreds of thousands of documents on complex commercial files. And we're using algorithms to process these documents to find viable or quality documents that will be useful and are legally defensible when we're actually using them in the course of an arbitration, in the course of a trial. At our firm, we actually have an in-house e-discovery firm or a team known as MT3. So what they do is it's a team of both software engineers and lawyers who are trained to look at these documents, create algorithms, and deploy them. And they're working with lawyers who are not, as tech savvy or as, knowledgeable about artificial intelligence to review these documents and find what works for them in terms of production of documents for discovery and all of that. In terms of the corporate side, we're also using artificial intelligence for corporate due diligence. So Kira is a software program that's it was created in Toronto, I believe. Like they have an office in Toronto. And again, it's the same idea. Hundreds to hundreds of thousands of documents are being reviewed in the course of due diligence for mergers, acquisitions, and other sorts of corporate transactions. We're also seeing artificial intelligence being used in the courts and outside of the courts. So for example, in tax law, we're seeing CRA lawyers as well as tax litigators using software for predictive analysis. So they'll enter certain parameters to help them determine the outcome of their case. The interesting thing with that is, depending on who you're talking to, whether it's a CRA lawyer or a tax litigator, you're going to come out with you're going to have a different outcome depending on the parameters that you're entering. We're also seeing it being used in family law for uncontested divorces. I believe the program is called vis-a-vis, and it's only being used in Ontario right now. But the point is to help individuals with a very simplified divorce process. If they're not able to come to a conclusion, they're advised to go and seek a mediator. And we're also seeing it being used in immigration as well. We know that the government of Canada is working on 2 pilot projects to process temporary visa applications from Chinese and Indian applicants. And at the end of the day, you still have an immigration officer who is reviewing these applications. And we're also looking at, or the government is looking at, using artificial intelligence to process compassionate leave or compassionate applications for different applicants as well. So again, we're looking at a human being playing a role in looking at the ultimate outcome. I did also want to talk really briefly about a case that came out in, I want to say it was March or April of this year. It's called Ewert versus Canada. And it's not specifically dealing with the use of artificial intelligence, but it goes back to this importance of the quality of data. So in Ewert versus Canada, there was a man, Mr. Ewert, he's a Métis Canadian, who was convicted in the mid-'80s for the murder and attempted murder of 2 individuals. And he's serving 2 concurrent, or I guess simultaneous, lifetime sentences. And so he wanted to challenge and he was successful in challenging the government for the use of certain psychological and actuarial risk assessments that use data that did not consider his status as an Indigenous person. And it was really interesting in that case because the act that governs the Correctional Services of Canada actually builds in protection for the consideration of Indigenous individuals and ethnic and cultural practices of people that are not white, right? Or just not the predominant population. And so the Supreme Court actually sided with Mr. Ewert and held that, you know, if we're going to use certain risk assessment tools, which are also employed in the use of artificial intelligence, we need to consider other factors. We need to consider the gender bias. We need to consider the racial bias. And so it was important in that case that it's important for that case that we need to start thinking about the use and the quality of the data that we're using in artificial intelligence. So yeah, that's how we're seeing it now in the legal profession.
That's great. That's a very important perspective, and thanks for bringing that to us. Sunil, I apologize because the language comes out of the Trump administration. But there's talk about, but I like the language, which is this idea of getting out of the geek ghetto. So what's meant by that is we've got huge demand for workers, skilled workers in AI on the technical side, but increasingly so we need more policy. We need more legal expertise to guide us through this. Are you seeing, what are you seeing in terms of the kind of new, you know, as this technology is deployed and the need for regulations and laws, balance, in your academic work, are you seeing kind of that dichotomy emerging of, you know, the technical capacity is needed, but at the end of the day, because of some of the limitations, as well as, you know, to steer some of the advantages that, you know, we need some policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all kind of green fields policy space. People are still thinking through all of these issues, but where you're seeing it kind of at the bleeding edge is in areas like weapons deployment, for example. People are realizing very quickly that the technology is very good already in terms of autonomous weapons deployment. We need to think about the ethics of that right now. We can't wait 5 years and let that sort itself out. Whereas if we're thinking about lawyers and looking at e-discovery, I mean, it's not a life or death situation. If McCarthy Tetra wants to develop technology to look at documents, great. We don't really need the government to kind of step in and look at the ethics of that necessarily right now. And I mean, I think that's a big part of the story here is that, I mean, there's a lot of hype around AI, but in terms of how it's actually playing out in a lot of sectors, it's still very, very early days. I mean, we've seen much more impacts from automation generally, so kind of robotics and other investments in technology over the last 15 years in the labor market in Canada than we have from AI. I mean, it's really hard to point to specific sectors and say X amount of jobs have been lost or changed or added as a result of AI currently. I mean, we've kind of got anecdotal stories around that. So, I mean, Goldman Sachs in the early part of the century, for example, they had 600 U.S. equity trade or currency traders in their New York desk. They now have 2 people doing that job, and they have 200 software engineers supporting the systems that are doing the jobs of those people. And part of the reason is it's expensive, right? So, I mean, it's the Goldman Sachs of the world, it's the RBCs of the world who can invest in this technology right now. It's not affordable enough for the average mom and pop small medium enterprise, which comprise 97% of the economy or whatever it is, to go out and buy an off-the-shelf AI system that's going to take over key business functions for them. So I think we're still at the early stages. Governments are starting to grapple with the notion that we do need some regulation, we do need some guidance, particularly around data usage here. I mean, in Canada, there's a huge kind of dichotomy between our privacy. We value it very much when it comes to our data, especially on the health side, but that kind of pulls against the imperative to have open data sets that these algorithms can learn from and can build upon. So if you compare Canada's political and legal context to China's, in a lot of ways, they're actually going to be much further ahead when it comes to accessing and using data sets than we are. And there are good reasons for that, and we have a lot of kind of moral imperatives for protecting our private data. But I think push is going to come to shove at a certain point where we realize if we really want to move ahead in some of these spaces, we're going to have to get smarter about anonymizing certain kinds of data, letting companies or the public sector use that data to build algorithms that can lead us forward in terms of innovation and productivity. I think we're still kind of at the very early stages of that. Now, most of the conversations governments are having are on the skills training, retraining side. So if people get disrupted out of jobs, how do we train them for new jobs? It hasn't really shifted at a very granular level, I would say, to kind of those more specific issues around data governance and things like that.
Okay, perfect. So and thanks for that. So we've talked about what AI is. For some context, we talked about the socioeconomic side. We've talked about kind of what the policy and legal ramifications are. So now it's time for a less scripted discussion on, how are we going to, what is the future of employment look like? And how are we as a country going to shift? So on the one hand, there's the change in the way we work. There's things like the gig economy, or, what impact does this have on childcare? What impact does this have on health benefits and pensions? We had jobs for life not long ago. That's no longer the case. We have the educational component that Steve mentioned, which is extremely important, and I see some universities addressing that heavily to get job-ready people out there. So maybe I'll put it to Steve to kind of start this discussion off on the educational side and what you see we need to do.
Going back to my original comments on, definitely we see that there's a need, and this is not unique to Canada, but to start young with K-12 computer science education and to make sure that that's introduced. And as I said as well, experiential learning and co-op for post-secondary. But actually one thing that I'd like to talk about in a question that touches on, I think, basically everything that everyone's raised is, what is the impact of automation, and particularly at Amazon? We look at AI and automation primarily, how can it improve our customers' lives and the products and services that we sell to our customers, and as well as our employees. We have over 600,000 employees globally, so this is something that we're always paying close attention to. And one really interesting thing that I love to see every time I go there is in Brampton, so about 40 minutes from here. We have we have 4 what we call fulfillment centers or warehouses in the GTA here, and one of them in Brampton is a robotic fulfillment center. And I say that to people, and most of them say, "Oh, so you don't have anybody working there, huh?" And quite actually entirely opposite. It is by far our largest fulfillment center in Canada in terms of workforce. And that's because the robots that we use, and they look like giant Roomba vacuums. You can go on YouTube and watch a video of it. We've automated the inefficient process of our fulfillment centers. If you go to one of our older fulfillment centers, there's long aisles of what we call racking, of products just on shelves, and people walk up and down and pick the items. People are really good and they have the judgment, but it's inefficient because they spend most of their day walking as opposed to picking the item. What we've automated is the robot brings this rack to you. It's a tower of shelving, and it brings it to what we call the picker. And then I forget who it was, but talked about the high judgment roles. The picker then picks the right product off. There might be 100 products on the shelf, and they pick the right one off. That automation, taking out the walking and the efficiency with which we can bring products, means that we need so many more employees working at that fulfillment center. On the inbound side, to be unloading the trucks coming in and putting those products on the shelves, and then on the outbound side, taking those, after the picker takes it, it goes down a conveyor belt. They have to put it in the box, tape the box, put it down the line, put it in the truck, pack the truck up. You need so many more people because the volume's so much higher because we can be so much more efficient and faster. So it's really changed the nature of the work, but created more jobs. There's more efficiency, more productivity. These are the most productive fulfillment centers. So I think that's how we look at it. It's a really interesting thing to come see, and I do encourage people to Google an Amazon robotic fulfillment center, and it's provided good skill training for our associates that work there as well. They're interacting with technology. It's something that we can teach them, that we can reskill to work with these robots. But then if they take that to go somewhere else, they have that experience now. They've worked with in this really high tech environment as well.
Regan.
So there's been a lot of really interesting comments here that I want to touch on, and Steve, I want to talk a little bit about the work you guys do. I think the thing that we need to remember, though, and there's some people in technology here, there's a central banker, there's a blue-collar person, there's a policy person, lawyer, is technology serves humans, not the other way around. And we have to think, and IBM has a corporate view on this, and I share it, obviously, which would be that technology enables people. And the idea that we are somehow beholden to this evolution where autonomous vehicles, for example, is coming up. There's, 800,000 people in Canada who are involved in transportation in some way, shape, or form. And with autonomous vehicles, and I'm looking at my central banking friend here, if we displaced 800,000 workers, over a period of 3, 4, 5 years, what impact would that have on the Canadian economy? Probably pretty significant, I would think, not to mention the social unrest, where people who are used to driving a truck or driving a taxi and are no longer doing that because there's a machine doing it. There's like big questions to think about that, to Sunil's point, which is the income disparities are huge. And we think about, as Canadians and as technologists, Steve and I, for example, we think about how do we use technology, make it better, make workplaces more efficient. But we should think about the human element on the other side of that. So, Steve, I when you talk about your fulfillment centers, I totally accept that. But I think about the retail sector in Canada, which has 1.2 million, 1.3 million people working in it. And as the shift for shopping goes online, there's a whole bunch of people who are going to be displaced by that type of consumer behavior. That's not to say Amazon is a bad actor, but if you have more people using an online service and less people going to Loblaws, right? But that goes back to what is technology for? Does it serve us or do we serve it? There's some real policy questions there that I think we haven't really discussed as a society as much as we should. The transportation one in particular is quite, I think, prevalent, because are you going to teach a truck driver how to code? Probably not, right? You could, but you're not going to take all 800,000 drivers, pardon me, and turn them into programmers. As important as programming is, our economy is diverse. It involves people who have a variety of skills, and I think we have to talk about these issues as a country, and then as companies we have to respond. One of the things that has come up is bias in AI, and that's something we think a lot about and spend a lot of time researching, and we think that's an area that governments have a role to play. For sure. We also think AI and algorithms should be able to demonstrate how they arrived at a conclusion. We're used to it as consumers, right? We just get an answer. But if you think back, there's a whole series of steps that were involved in getting there. And this is just sort of the basics of searching on Google or using Amazon or whatever. But there's some other big questions like AI in healthcare. And if AI is going to augment the work of a physician, how does that AI machine help a physician do his or her job, and what is the linearity involved in that algorithm getting from data input, which you talked about, to output? So I'll just say education is part of it, but it's a much bigger macro question that there's going to be whole sections of the economy that are completely displaced if things keep going the way they are. And there's lots of examples in history when large sects of the population are displaced, and what happens to countries and economies when that occurs, that we need to have a grown-up conversation about.
Yeah, so that's great, and that's the meat of the discussion I think we wanted to get into. I will, provide one perspective, and that's when I was talking to the truck drivers, and I was kind of nervous about talking to them because I thought, they're really not going to like me because of my, AI work. And you know what they said? They said, no, we're the fastest adopters because there's a lot more to a truck driver than driving a truck. And it actually frees them up. A lot of these lane guidance and a lot of these kinds of things actually causes a lot of safety and helps them not to worry about some things and worry about other things that provide value, more value to the business. But this is really good. This is where I want to go. So Sunil,
just maybe 3 very quick provocations. I mean, I like Amazon. Well, my wife likes Amazon, so I come home and I have to recycle about 100 boxes every week, which I don't enjoy. But I mean, you mentioned the 600,000 global employees. I mean, I think the median wage of those employees is $31,000. So the question becomes not, are we creating jobs? So what's the quality of these jobs? And there are also tax revenue implications for a country like Canada, where Amazon is largely exempt from our tax reach, and we're not getting nearly as much tax revenue as we would like. So if we're talking then about funding skills training for workers who are displaced by technologies, where are we getting that revenue if Amazon, Google, Facebook are deriving huge value from data from Ontarians, from Canadians, but we're not getting any tax revenue from that? Then second point, to Regan's question, I mean, there's also a fundamental disconnect between what we want as consumers and what we want as citizens. So as a consumer, I love Amazon. It's quick, it's immediate, I get what I want. I don't have to go and mix with people at a store, which I, as somebody who don't like talking to people, I love that. But as a citizen, that's a problem, right? I mean, if I look around in 5 or 10 years and think, what happened to the streets in Toronto, which used to be vibrant and have the local mom and pop stores and employ the local people? Where are they all? Guess what? They're gone because Amazon and other companies like it, I'm not picking on Amazon, bankrupted those. Oh, you're picking on Amazon. Just because they didn't give us HQ2. Otherwise, I would have been
it's all
very happy with all
HQ2.
this.
Yeah.
And then the third general point is, I mean, it comes down to, again, social supports. I mean, employment insurance in Canada, right now, if you're unemployed in Canada, fewer than 40% of unemployed Canadians actually are eligible for EI. That number was over 80% in the late 1970s. We spend far less than most other advanced economies on social spending. We're 25th out of 35 OECD countries on taxation rates. So if we want to have well, you may think that until you're out of a job and then you are looking for skills training or affordable housing. And again, it's easy for somebody in this room, I would say, to say, thank God, but I'm talking about the 20, 30, 40% of the population who aren't making $80,000, $100,000, $150,000 a year. So I mean, for me, it's great. Hey, I'd rather pay more taxes and help people who